Hi, and welcome to your fast literacy analysis. So, we're looking at chapter 1 of Treasure Island. You've hopefully just watched the video where we've read through it. If you haven't, make sure that you check back to lesson 1, where we're actually just listening and reading at the same time. Alrighty. So, that doesn't look quite right. Let's fix that quickly. That's better. Sorry, just changing the screen a bit easier to read. There we go. Alrighty. So let's start by looking at chapter 1, which was the old sea dog at the Admiral Benbow. So, as we explored in class, we looked at the fact that that first paragraph is actually just one sentence. So it's not really a paragraph, it's actually just one sentence. It's the first sentence of the novel, and it is: Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole peculiars about the Treasure Island, from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island, and that only because there is still treasure not lifted, I take up my pen in the year of grace 17 and go back to a time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the sabre cut first took up his lodgings under our roof. Alright, so let's have a look. So we're introduced to two characters here. We've got Squire Trelawney over here. As we can see, we've got Dr. Livesey and the rest of these gentlemen. So we haven't been introduced to the gentlemen yet, but we know there are obviously some more gentlemen. And they've asked the narrator. So the narrator is the one telling us the story. We don't know much about the narrator at this point, but we know that he's been asked to write the account of what has happened. So, and that he is going to, as the narrator or the author, he is going to try and tell you everything he can about his experiences, as we can see, from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island. So you should be able to expect lots of detail from this book. You should be able to expect that everything's going to be written out, except for one thing, obviously, where the island actually is. All right. We can tell that this is a rather old written book. We can tell this because we look at the part where it says, I take up my pen in the year of grace 17. And so while they haven't given you a direct year, we know that it's somewhere in the 1700s. So we could say 1759, 1784. We don't quite know, but we know that it is sometime in that 100 years. But we also know, because it says things like, I take up my pen in the year of grace. Now, this sort of language isn't very normal for us because we've moved on linguistically. So we don't no longer write like this. And if I got you guys to write me a story, you would not be writing, I take up my pen in the year of grace. It's a very old-fashioned, very English way of speaking and communicating. And to go back to the time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn. So we got a bit more detail. We know that the beginning of the story is going to start at the Admiral Benbow Inn. We know that the end of the story is going to end to do with Treasure Island. So this first sentence is really set up a lot about what we're going to get from this story. Then we have an additional character, and this is the brown old seaman with the sabre cut, who first took up his lodgings under our roof. Now, he's separated from Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, which makes us think that the brown old seaman isn't going to be around at the end of the book. Can you see why I'm looking at that? When I look at the start of the sentence, there is no reference to this brown old seaman. Otherwise, they would have repeated that down here and said if the brown old seaman had been Squire Trelawney, it would have just repeated Squire Trelawney or Dr. Livesey, or it would have mentioned the brown old seaman and the rest of these gentlemen. So obviously we've got a character that's going to be there at the beginning, but we can tell already that something's going to happen to this character because he's not going to be there at the end of the story. We can also see a lot of the grammar that we've been looking at this week. So we have the first two words of the sentence are all capital letters. This is a very, again, old style of writing, so it's particular to this. I would not expect you to be writing like that. And it's just a way that things used to be written. Then we have a list, which means we have to use commas. Very good. So Squire Trelawney, comma, Dr. Livesey, comma, and then we're about to finish our list, so we put the word and. These rest of these gentlemen having asked me to write down the particulars about Treasure Island, comma. Oh, because it's a big sentence. It's a big sentence where there's a lot of information. The main idea to start us off, it's a big one, which kind of also makes us understand that this book is going to be a big tale. From the beginning to the end, again, really emphasizing this is a big story coming up. Keeping nothing back. Author's really pushing this point. Nothing's going to be held back. This is going to be all the details. Big novel coming your way. And that is only because there is still treasure not lifted. So we've kind of left this author's giving us this allure that there's something that you can find, that even if you read the whole book, there's still a bit of mystery that's going to be at the end. You're never going to know where the island is. So the author is really setting up this adventure, mystery, sort of, seafaring story that's coming up. We go into the narrator who takes up their pen, again using that old language, and go back to a time. So when we're going back in time again, that's also saying, like, we're even going further back now. So we've started pretty old coming in 2020. This story is going further back than when the narrator, is actually picking up their pen and writing the story of Treasure Island. So the author is really pushing this kind of historical, looking back on the good old times kind of story when there were pirates and seafarers and mystery and treasure. So, the author's done a really good job of that. And then we've introduced the mysterious character, the brown old seaman. Then additional information, which we put in commas, with the saber cut. So with the saber cut, we could actually even cut that out. So we could say, and the brown old seaman first took up his lodgings under our roof. Sorry, guys. But they've added this little bit of detail. So they've just capsulated it into commas because it's not necessary information. However, it's adding to the character, this mysterious character with a saber cut. Now, for those of you who don't know, a saber is a type of sword that was used, and as far as I know, isn't a very popular sword these days. So it's very common in pirate mythology, and that look of someone with a big saber, which is that big sword like that, and the handkerchief tied around their heads, and jaunty pants, and long beards. So just under, under 100 words. Under 100 words, and we already can analyze so much information about the story we're about to read. Then we go back to the narrator. I remember him as if it was yesterday. Now we're going to go into this really big part where we're going to break down all these characteristics about his character. Now, the author's obviously put a lot of thought into what his character looks like, sounds like, how he walks, how he wears his hair. So the author's obviously really got a good visualization, and he's communicating that to us through the narrator. Now, he's done a really good job of we would be able to describe him or draw him really easily because the author has done such a good job. And this is one of the reasons I wanted you to read chapter 1 of this book, is because I think the author has done a wonderful job of really bringing that character to life. So let's have a look at some of the things they've used to describe the brown old seaman with the saber cut. All right, so he came plodding. So the way in which he walks is to plod. He has a sea chest following behind him and a hand barrow. Then we get into this real obvious description. He's tall. He's strong. He's heavy. So when they talk about heavy, I think they mean more like heavy set, which is to say that he's quite big in the shoulders, long arms, and he's a big thing. So we describe that as heavy. He's nut brown, so that's describing his skin. And when we're looking at a seaman, we're thinking about lots of sun. This is before sunscreen, so he would have been sunburnt and then developed quite a severe nut brown tan. His tarry pigtail. Now, a tarry pigtail, your next lesson's just finished uploading. A pigtail is like a little piece of hair like this, and it's tarry, so it's all, look at that. It's all like this. So we know this is a tarry pigtail, just that little bit there, and it'd be hanging off his head somewhere. Where? Well, over his shoulder, isn't it? So it's just on his shoulder. So it's got to be a bit long, doesn't it? So again, we're really getting this idea of who this character is. We don't know his name yet, but we already know so much about him. His pigtail is falling over his soiled blue coat. Soiled means dirty, stained, ripped. It can mean lots of things, but it's to say very well worn. So it might have stains, or the lining might be ripped. So think, a really beaten up blue coat. So it's not really going to be that blue anymore, is it? So if something's really dirty, it changes the color. So it's a dirty blue. His hands were ragged and scarred. So he's obviously got lots of white scars on his hands, and they're obviously very rough. There's probably calluses on his hands from working with ropes. There's, again, very tanned because they're out in the sun. So his hands would probably be quite wrinkled as well. And he had black broken nails. So someone who works with their hands a lot will find that they get bruised nails and their fingernails go black. So if you're thinking about blacksmiths or people who work predominantly with their hands in factories, will sometimes have black nails, not just because it's unclean or because they work at a mechanics where there's lots of oil, but because they get a lot of bruising on their fingernails. So this man obviously goes through a lot. The saber cut is across one cheek. So who knows which one, but one of them. A dirty, livid white. Now, livid can mean two things. So livid is, we can describe a feeling. So you're livid, you're really angry, but also livid can also mean really bright. So it could be either. It could be a angry white scar or a really bright white scar. So we can have a think about how you imagine that in your head and think a saber cut. So it would, be quite a big slice because they're quite long swords. It'd probably start small, get very big, and then get small again. Yes, I looked up lots of information on sabers. Then the narrator goes back to remembering how he looked and what he was doing. So we go back to the author's perspective. I remember him looking round the clove and whistling to himself as he did so. So this man is obviously very observant. He's looking around. He's whistling to himself. He's thinking. When we're thinking and we're looking around for things, sometimes we can hum a song or tap our feet. And then he breaks out into the old sea song that he sang so often afterwards. So referencing the fact that this character the narrator is going to get to know this character quite well, because he obviously knows this particular seaman has sings this song quite often. We then go into the song using a colon. So we're using a colon, and then we're breaking down into the song because it's direct speech. that he's quoting, we've then used the quotation marks. And because we've used the colon plus the quotation marks, 15 needs a capital letter. Same with the new paragraph down here, where we've used a capital Y, and because he's singing, and it ends with an emphasis, not necessarily loudness, but an emphasis. You can see that they've also put an exclamation mark, but because it came in the middle of the sentence, remember, if we use an exclamation mark in the middle of the sentence within a direct quote, the next word does not have a capital letter. So I'm really going to reference as much as possible those grammar lessons that you've gone through so that we are constantly referring back to those. Then he has something called a high, old, tottering voice. My gosh, a high, old, tottering voice. Let's break it down. High, as in, hello. We talk about like having a high voice and we talk like this. Then old, so we know that it's going to be slow. It's going to be craggy. It's going to be like, tottering means that it goes from one bit to the next. Tottering. And it sounds like it has been tuned and broken at the capstan bars. So it is broken in the sense that it is not a broken voice, but it's out of pitch. So it won't sound nice and soft and like this and idyllic. It will sound really like irritating to the ears. Okay, when you've listened to music that's out of tune, or if you listen to a piano that hasn't been tuned, it will be like that. It will be like someone badly playing an out of tune piano. That's what they're describing the voice as. He rapped on the door with a bit of stick like a hand spike that he carried. So we're talking a short stick, spiky on the end, like that. He rapped on the door. And then the narrator's father has appeared in the story. He then calls roughly for a glass of rum, and when this is brought to him, he drinks it slowly like a connoisseur. A connoisseur is someone who is a master appreciator of something. So you can be a connoisseur of chocolate, or you could be a connoisseur of bread. So it just means like a master appreciator. He's lingering on the taste, so he's he's showing that he really enjoys this rum. This man does not sound like a good character. He doesn't sound like a good person. Not very talkative, obviously. This is a handy cove, he said. At length, that means there was a large amount of silence. So he's sat quietly for a long period of time. So when we say when the author says he at length, means there was a long pause there. And a pleasant sitiated grog shop, much company made. Now that the character is just talking, we can see that it's not just the song. This character is going to talk like a pirate. Okay, handy cove, pleasant sitiated grog shop. Sitiated, remember, being situated. So he's obviously using a colloquial language. Colloquial means when we're talking informally. So we say sitiated, but what we actually mean, as the dictionary says, situated. Much company mate. Now, mate is a word that in Australia we use for slightly different purposes, but mate in this context is someone who works on a ship. My father told him, no, very little company, the more was the pity. So the narrator's father is saying that there's very little company, but that's a bad thing for the father. The father is saying, we have no company, but it's not a good thing. But this character, this old sea man, he's obviously really excited, isn't he? Because he says, well then, this is the berth for me. So we already know that he's not interested in any particular company. He's not looking for people to hang out with. Here, you matey, he cried to the man who trundled the barrow. So he's looking at someone who has got the barrow so that he can take it up to the inn at the top of the cove. Bring up alongside and help up my chest. I'll stay here a bit. So he hadn't actually made the decision to stay until the father had said there was very little company. So he's obviously looking for somewhere secretive or where there aren't a lot of people, where he can't be found. So there's lots going on with this character. He then says, I'm a plain man. Rum and bacon and eggs is what I want. And that head up there for to watch ships off. Now, when he talks about the head, he's talking about at the top of the cove, as we go up, beach down here, go up the cove, and then the head would be the little bit at the tip where you could look over the sea. So he's obviously interested in watching the sea. Why is he interested in watching the sea? Who knows? We'll find out. He then announces that his name is Captain. So from this point on, I refer to him as Captain. He is able to throw down 3 or 4 gold pieces on the threshold. Now, this is an interesting thing. When the author writes from the narrator, the author knows how many coins there would be because the author is making this up. So he should know if there are 3 or 4 gold pieces. But he's writing from the perspective of a narrator who is remembering what happened. So the narrator can't quite remember. Was there 3 gold pieces? Was there 2 gold pieces? How many gold pieces? He's taken a guess. So this is something that authors can do to make the narrator sound more realistic, because they're, double guessing a bit of information or not quite sure what they remembered, just like a real person would do. You can tell me when I've worked through that, he says he, looking as fierce as a commander. So when he says looking as fierce as a commander, they're obviously talking about a facial expression and a body language. So think about fierce as a commander. And indeed, as bad as his clothes were, and as coarsely as he spoke, he had none of the appearance of a man who sailed before the mast, but seemed like a mate or skipper, accustomed to being obeyed or to strike. So in this, we're now learning a bit about his personality and his presence within the story. So we know that he's dressed badly. We know that the way he speaks is uncouth, is not the way a commander should speak. The captain shouldn't speak like that. A captain should be loquacious and speak properly like they do in the dictionary. But for this one, he's not speaking properly. He does not dress properly, but he still has this air about him as someone who is used to being listened to. And when he says go, you go. And when he says stop, you stop. So we've really got an idea of his presence and personality as well. And then we go into the additional details. So now the author's repeating. He's learned that this place is described as lonely. So again, we've got a badly dressed, badly spoken, very commanding person who was just rocked up, said, are there any people around? They've said no. Then we're finding out from the man who came with the barrow that he's already asked about this place. He knows that it's lonely. He's confirming for himself, is this going to be somewhere he bumps into people? So he's obviously got something to hide there. So lots of mystery. So in terms of this character, we're going to then go into an activity using what we've learned from this analysis, and I will write that down for you. All right. Thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you soon. Bye.